Welcome to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. This is Greg Banks. I'm your host. Thanks for coming along with me today. If you've been trying to figure out whether Data 360 is just a rebrand of Data Cloud or something genuinely different, this episode cuts through the noise. Co-host Allie Nelson is back with me today, and we're joined by 𝗬𝗎 the Sirius team's Data 360 expert who's been deep in this product as it evolved. In this conversation, we'll get practical about what actually changed with the Data 360 relaunch, zero copy versus traditional integration and why that matters. We talk about Tableau Semantics, unstructured data, and the new Agentforce 360 hooks. And for those that are new, how to start small with one use case instead of trying to solve everything at once. All right, let's get into it. Welcome back to Salesforce at Scale. Allie Nelson joining me today again as the co-host. Good to have you, Allie.
Yes, hello. How's it going?
And repeat guest, 𝗬𝗎 was back on episode 20 on a military spouse episode. And then we talked about how she just showed up out of nowhere and became really, really relevant really quick. And that actually is a topic we're going to talk about today. Data 360. No surprise to anybody that's in the ecosystem for the last 12 to 18 months. The news cycle on Salesforce has been insane. And then coming out of Dreamforce this past year, not uncommon for Salesforce to rename stuff. In fact, I think that's kind of what they try to do on everything, but they renamed everything coming out of Dreamforce this past year, it seemed like. I'm going to let Allie and Emily kind of dive into this stuff today, but Data 360 is one that's got a lot of importance to it. Anybody who's been around the platform for, I would say, more than 7 or 8 years, it wasn't that long ago when you were trying to build a Salesforce solution for an enterprise company. You could do so many remarkable things inside the platform, but inevitably there were really important things in your business that were outside the platform, and there wasn't a meaningful way to have access to them from Salesforce. You had to build an interface and copy that stuff in or do something really funky. The door has finally been kicked open to kind of change that game. Allie, Emily, I'm going to hand it over to you guys, but thank y'all for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So yes, we've heard a lot about Data Cloud, Data 360. We've been hearing, just thinking about like all of the different news sources that I follow in the ecosystem, everyone is talking about data, which, on one hand, I'm really grateful for that because, data is kind of at the core of everything that we do. But I think that there is a lot of confusion around exactly what this product is and what the differences are, because to my understanding, Data 360 is not just a rename, it's actually a relaunch and enhancement of the tool. And so I think it's important for us to start with defining what exactly is Data 360. Emily?
Yeah, great question. Data 360 really starts off with specifically people who are in the Salesforce ecosystem and who are using Salesforce products, a way to bring all that stuff together. And I think a huge change for clients who are looking at Data 360 is that you're no longer like a billing situation. You're no longer being charged to ingest your own data from Salesforce specifically. And that is a huge change in helping things just be clearer. But then from there is to take all this data that you have maybe in an ERP and other sorts of systems, and now you have this unified profile that you can look at and then you can act upon. Is there any other big things you'd want to call out about that, Allie?
I think the biggest thing is just kind of making sure that everyone understands what we mean by unification is we mean pulling your data from multiple different sources to make sure that you actually have a 360-degree view of what's going on. Back in 2019, I think, is when Salesforce launched their Customer 360 marketing, which was, hey, this idea of you can see everything about your customer in Salesforce. But a lot of people, especially, as your business grows, we're quick to jump in and clarify, well, that doesn't actually give me a full 360 view. I have my financial information in an ERP. I might have hours clocked against a job in a payroll system. I might have order information in my fulfillment system. And, at scale, it doesn't, not everyone can use Salesforce for all of those functions. I know that Salesforce themselves would say, hey, we're not a payroll processor. We are not an ERP. And so when we're talking about data unification, what we're really talking about is finding common connection points between data in all of these different systems and bringing it together so that you do have a comprehensive view of that customer, all the way from when they're a lead in Marketing Cloud, when they become a customer in Salesforce, to when they have orders being fulfilled, when hours are being logged against their job, when they're hopefully paying you. So it's really this idea of connecting everything and actually giving you a 360-degree view. I know that there's a lot of new features as well with Data 360, but before we talk about the new features, can you talk a little bit, Emily, about what people might want to use just previously Data Cloud for? What are just some of the core use cases to be bringing your data together?
So I love that you bring up what are the big use cases, because I think when people hear about new Salesforce products, they might ask themselves, okay, how do I use Data 360? But what we've talked about before, even when it was Data Cloud and prior names, you don't come to Salesforce and say, I want to use Data 360. How do I do it? You say, I have a problem with this, and with what you already have, Data 360 is the solution. So I think always the question is, what is our biggest issue? And are we marketing to the right group of people? A lot of my history is in Revenue Cloud. And I think the question is, hey, do we have a segment are we making sure that the people who are spending this amount of money, that we are reaching these clients? We don't need to spend all of our budget on everybody. We need a targeted segment that we make sure we are only spending on people who fit this, whatever that is. I think the real question is first on the business side to say, what is it that we are trying to do? And Data 360 is that's the answer to that. Hey, we can find the exact segment. We can market to the right people, whatever that looks like. There's a lot of answers. But I think my favorite is really finding the group of clients or data that you're trying to reach. And Data 360 is just the chef's kiss when it comes to that.
And so, at a tactical level, this really means things like bringing in customer invoice data from an
Mhm.
ERP. It means things like if you are using other marketing tools. It means
Yeah.
bringing over those customer profiles and, normalizing them with Salesforce profiles.
Mhm.
And forecasts.
Yeah,
That was
absolutely.
one thing I always heard from salespeople is, what did we say we were going to do, and where are we? Like, how do I stand on my success rate for the year? And that
Absolutely.
forecast is important.
And I think another big thing is that Data Cloud, but even before this change, Data Cloud felt really scary to a lot of people. For some reason, it felt like this big, bad data platform that you had to learn so much about to be able to implement. It felt really just scary. And I think ultimately, I want people to understand that Data Cloud is not it doesn't have to be an enormous undertaking. It doesn't have to be connect absolutely everything about all of your different platforms together in phase one. It really can be let me go connect my fulfillment tool to Salesforce to make sure that order statuses get updated and attached to the right customer. It can be one single type of data that you're bringing in, and it can just be one use case to start. It's very iterative.
Yeah, I think you're right. It can start off really simple. To that point, though, that was a specific use case. I think that's the hardest part, is like, what information is that we really need? And I think another thing to call out about Data 360 is when we first started in this, we still talk about the importance of a unified profile or unification, which that record is really important to know. The more we get into it, the more I realize if companies come and they already have Snowflake or Databricks, another large data lake situation, what's another just simple use case for Data Cloud is it is the best connector when it comes to your Salesforce products. So even to turn it on to make sure that you are having that stuff you already have there, and it's free to ingest your Salesforce data through those connectors. That's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to ask a question. I know y'all are not being accidental with your words. You've said this word connection about 8 times. And I'm an old school guy. And back in the day when you wanted data in, you wrote in interface or an integration, which literally went to some other system, did some kind of transformation to the data, and then copied it into Salesforce if I wanted to have it visible there. I know the difference, but I want you to define it for our audience that connecting is not the same thing as integrating. The things about interfaces that scare people to death is I've got 2 systems made by 2 different companies on 2 different release schedules who are never going to coordinate how they do stuff. And then I've got an interface that's going to A and bringing it to B that I've got to somehow maintain those 2. It's like having a language translator, right? You got to make sure you keep up on both sides or the thing breaks. It's dumb. It only goes and gets exactly what you tell it to bring it here. So define connection before we go any further. I think it's a really important difference in what this is offering for our clients.
Yeah, Emily, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big term that Salesforce is going to say is zero copy. So when you talked about the connection and you have those integrations, you're taking a copy of the data that's like in Snowflake or your other ERPs, whatever connection we're talking about. But with Data 360, it's zero copy. It's not taking a copy. So those standard connectors is what they call them on Data 360. They're set up. It's somebody, I'm not a developer. I can create that connection. And so it's really neat to see, but they're not taking a copy, it's getting a view. And that's why Data 360 is able to take such large amounts of data because it's not truly taking it, it's giving you a view of it.
It's kind of like the difference between me taking a photo and printing it and framing it, taking a photo in my backyard and then putting it on my back wall of my house. So I've copied that image versus me just building a window.
That's a really good analogy. I'm stealing that one.
Well, and I mean, it's important to call out the risks of copying data over because you can integrate. You absolutely can integrate with your ERP, especially the smaller ones. They have pre-built connectors to bring invoice data and things over to Salesforce, but that means that your data lives in two places. And so then potentially if it gets changed in one place and something happens with the integration, or, maybe we're batching our updates, then you might have two different pieces of information in those two systems. And so really our data platform is solving the challenge of making sure that we are seeing accurate data, making sure that we're not having any duplicated data, anything incorrect, and it's all real time, which is really cool. So now that we are officially Data 360, there have been several new features that launched with the rename, with the relaunch. And so let's talk about those new features. I think you already mentioned one of them, which is that the pricing has changed. And that's a huge, huge benefit to people. But what other new changes have come with the relaunch?
So the biggest thing is the Agentforce 360. It's now baked into the product. Agents can access that information natively. It's a lot easier. And I think the agents, we interact not just within Salesforce agents, but all around. So that's something I think for a client or a customer would just right away make the most sense. And then kind of what you have said, Allie, about the terminology has changed. I don't know, would you like to speak to that point?
Yeah, so there's a new tool called Tableau Semantics. And my understanding is that it's called Tableau Semantics because then you can also use it in Tableau as well. But a big challenge that a lot of people have, we work with a lot of customers who I'll use just NetSuite as the example, but in NetSuite, a customer is a customer. Like the actual table is the customer table. Same thing with any products that you sell in NetSuite, they're items. In Salesforce, those tables have different names. They're accounts and products. And especially when we bring more systems into the mix, once we bring in an order fulfillment tool, those terminology differences can cause a lot of confusion. It usually is somewhere in your integration code to make sure that things are being named correctly. And so with Tableau Semantics, you basically get to build a lexicon. You get to say account equals customer so that as you're building out data streams, there's zero confusion about which table you're connecting to. I think this is especially important once we get into things like custom objects because different businesses will name tables different things constantly, which is absolutely fair. You need to name things that make sense for your business, but we don't want those naming conventions to be a barrier. So I'm really excited about semantics just because I know that gets to be a big question. Some people call their accounts leads even after they're a customer. And so being able to just streamline and make sure that system to system to system, which tables match up, I think is really important. The other one that I'm kind of excited for is the unstructured data inclusion. So for anybody who's not familiar, what we mean when we're talking about unstructured data is we mean data that is in inconsistent formatting. So think about formats that we know and we can rely on. We know that dates are going to be in a consistent format. We have some disagreements with Europe about that, but it's going to be consistent across your database. Things like pick lists, we know are going to be one of a certain number of values. Unstructured data is going to be things like large text fields. Think about like on orders or quotes, you might find a special notes field. That's just a big old field of information. Email messages. These things typically, in Data Cloud could not be included in data streams. And they're also, it's something that you would have to have an agent to work with. But now Data 360 is able to work with unstructured data. And it basically means that you can find matches across pretty much any field, which is really cool. I'm really excited for that.
That's huge. I actually thinking about that when Data Cloud had come out. And I think that was actually one of the biggest, when I talk about people who are more data scientists, because Data Cloud really is about people who understand data, not just in a sense of like, I'm looking at Salesforce CRM data, but like when it comes across, it doesn't look like maybe what we expect it to look like. So for people who are used to working with data like this, unstructured versus structured, this is huge. It is going to be, I think, one of the biggest game changers of making more accessible for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think, going back to how people feel about getting started with Data Cloud, if it was, hey, you can't have any unstructured data, well, that's a barrier and also a huge implementation step. You have to do a certain number of cleanup steps before you can even get started, and now it just becomes easier. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I'm seeing that the setup also should be a little bit faster now, especially when we're talking about the agents that you mentioned. So
Incredibly faster.
previously, if you wanted to have your agent search invoice data, that's just going to be my default example. You had to go and set up those data streams and then set up agent actions to access that specific data stream, and potentially make sure that you have included in instructions that you're looking for sales invoice terminology, because the terminology is different. And so now, because Agentforce is just embedded and there are new out-of-the-box agent actions that can search data streams, you basically skip those steps. It's just so much easier. You set up your data stream and your agent has access to them. And with semantics, it knows what they're called, which I think is going to be really cool.
Yeah, this to me feels like, I'm going to say this parallels in my mind what Salesforce did with clicks, not code, that I have an idea and I can click and make a UI as opposed to somebody sat down and wrote code to do that several years ago. I think about when we were an SAP shop where I came from. We were a 100-year-old company. Our SAP instance went back 38 years. So when you said we're going to bring data in, that was one question to 1,000 others. How much data? What fields off that data? If you go back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, SAP looked different 10 years ago, which means the data structure different 15 years ago. I'm not going to say that data is not valuable. It talks about when we got that client. But now I've got to, even to go get one client record, I've got 3 different structures I've got to deal with because of the evolution of a long-standing history with an enterprise company. So this is an absolute game changer.
Yeah. And with changing the game means that there's a lot to find out and learn. I know it's been super fun, Emily, for you and a couple others on our team to go and learn about data things, but it feels like a lot. Can you talk about what options Salesforce has to learn about this? Like how can you take a bite-sized piece to start learning about Data 360?
Absolutely. Honestly, always the first step is just to go to Salesforce Trailhead. Personally for myself, as new things come out, they always have little tidbits of little, what they call trails, and you can learn about all this new stuff. Also, there's a lot of, if you're a Salesforce partner like Series Solutions, there are training opportunities. It's actually where I was able to get this sweatshirt. I got to go out to California and meet with the Data Cloud, or back then it was Data Cloud experts. Great times. And then also, my personal feeling is I love LinkedIn. I follow all the people at Salesforce who are the Data 360 implementation partners. And there is actually a Data 360, its own LinkedIn page. They're constantly putting talks, chats, learning opportunities. I highly encourage you to follow it. Is there anything, Allie, that you have found to be helpful?
I mean, same thing, a lot of ecosystem resources. I always follow everything on Salesforce Ben. I have a number of friends who are constantly putting out new articles and just really trying to share information. I think our community is very much about sharing information. The cliche, high tide raises all boats situation. In the ecosystem, I do think that this move to Data Cloud in general, but also the shifts that we're seeing within Data 360, I do think that this signals some changes in how Salesforce is seeing themselves in, not only the CRM ecosystem, but overall tech. Can you speak a little bit about kind of what changes we're seeing overall in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think overall we're trying to get everything connected. When I say we, I think Salesforce is really trying to fit into the current tech stack, as you might say. Allie, why don't you speak to that next part of what you're thinking?
Yeah, because like I said, Salesforce, it used to be that Salesforce was like, hey, I can do everything. And it's like, no, a CRM is a CRM and an ERP is an ERP, et cetera. So it really feels like they're trying to position themselves as that primary CRM and primary tool that you use that brings everything along. But I also think that this shift is going to challenge more businesses to say, hey, how can you start to remove your business bottlenecks? Because with Data Cloud having some limitations, having a little bit more setup time involved. It was really tough for people to get started. But now that it's significantly easier to set up Data Cloud, to ingest data that might not be as structured yet, I think that there's going to be a huge opportunity for people to think about how can you get creative in solving some of those business problems, and how can you think out of the box? When we talk to our customers about a pain point that they're having, one that Greg and I on projects together have seen time and time again is, handoff between teams. So how does the finance team know that a job has been completed and is ready to go? A lot of times, we're thinking about, well, it'd be nice if they sent them a notification. It'd be nice if this person got notified here, because we're thinking in terms of existing tools. But with Data 360, we can see data and information from anywhere, and we can use that data in so many new ways. So I think it's going to be an opportunity for businesses to start thinking out of the box about how do you remove those bottlenecks. Maybe nobody needs to be notified, because you can have an agent going through and confirming that things have been invoiced properly after a job has been done, and surfacing only the problem children to you. It's this idea of moving from highly manual processes to trusting the system that you're in, because your data is actually connected and you can trust that it's accurate. It feels cliche to be like, Salesforce is all about trust. It's one of their core values. But I mean, it does go back to being able to trust your data.
I do think it's a really good call out to say, instead of trying to be the end all, is that we're just going to do what we do very well. And one thing that right away people are seeing the benefit of agents. So data, like Data 360, it's turned on just to use your agent, but to take it to that next step further, like you were saying, let's stick with the invoice example, that without, you just like turn your computer on every day and you could do this calculated insight where it's already ran that information to your point, and every day you're seeing where it's taken that information from another source, another connected, and you just wake up and you're like, hey, this agent just helped me out, whatever you're naming it. And it is very exciting to see.
Yeah. The thing, Allie, I'm thinking back to some early conversations of you and I getting here with a client. This is what they call them growing pains for a reason, right? I think there's a shift from transaction to environment. We had a client who they did thousands and thousands of jobs a month, and every job when it got done, they had to go look, what was the total, what's been paid, find the balance, did it deposit, did it clear? These were all manual activities. When in reality, and I'll never forget Allie saying this, well, how often is that a problem? 10% of the time? Why are you looking at every record?
Yeah.
What if you only saw that 10% and then just had to do, like, this is my to-do list. This is the stuff I can check down. It is a monument. I remember when 𝗬𝗏 got brought out at Dreamforce. And prior to 𝗬𝗏, it was like you go to reports, you click run, and then you watch the little circle spin, right? It was this death by a million pauses. When 𝗬𝗏 came out and they brought in like, here's 400,000 records. What does that look like? And everybody honestly expected at Dreamforce for that demo to go south. Like they're going to click it and then they're going to talk about something else, sleight of hand, right? Don't watch the screen, listen to me. And it was like that. And I think in everybody's mind, they said, I haven't been able to dream this big before.
Yeah.
But even then, you still had a way to get that data into what they called 𝗬𝗏. But I don't know what the last name was when they killed that, moved to this model. But you still had to copy the data in to do much with it. So this radically changes the type of conversation companies can have. And it really knocks down barriers that just forever. I mean, for as long as I've been in the ecosystem, 15 years of it, this wasn't a topic you really could have.
And it also, I think, the final shift that I'm seeing is just further confirmation that Salesforce is all in on Agentforce. Seeing tools be restructured specifically so that they work seamlessly with Agentforce shows us like that Agentforce is how business will be done. And I think the biggest challenge, just like from a user perspective, is going to be like, well, what if the agent doesn't know what I do when I review my items? And it's like, well, yes, but that's where we need excellent BAs to document those requirements accurately. It's where we need excellent admins. We need great testers. So, I think that we're going to see a lot more of a push for people to trust that the system can do what it needs to do. And that's what we can help with.
Absolutely.
So, Emily, you've been spending a lot of time learning about Data Cloud for years now. What would you say to people who are feeling kind of overwhelmed with all of the new options and, frankly, all of the training opportunities out there? Trailhead has a lot of content. So what would you say if people are feeling kind of overwhelmed?
I mean, I'm right there with you. But I would also say to what we talked about earlier, any of those like learning opportunities, I'm personally love a good podcast. So I would be out there listening to podcasts like this, anything that talks about Data 360, and even though it's outdated, maybe Data Cloud. I also would say to make sure that you're getting out there, and LinkedIn is a place that I have suggested. I just think having conversations with people will lead you down where you need to go. Something that I didn't fully understand as I was starting this whole process is when it comes to Data Cloud or Data 360, you might already have somebody in your company who is a data scientist, and they might be acting as somebody else in the role of their company, but they understand how those numbers work. And I think it's interesting to find people in that way too and start having those conversations. They might already know more about what Data 360 can do than you understand. So kind of, yeah, I just say feel around in your company too to see who is your data scientist guy.
Yeah, I think, we think data scientist, we think data specialist, and we think that we have to go find a new skill set. But I hazard to say at every single company that we've worked with as a customer, there is somebody who is pulling reports and putting them in spreadsheets and working with them to get the information they need. You've got somebody who's doing that. And all you need to do is empower them to learn about the tools that can make their lives easier to get you that information faster, because the fastest spreadsheeter in the West, still can't necessarily compare to just being able to actually have that data surface directly in the system. And I know Greg specifically might be the fastest spreadsheeter in the West.
Well, and I'm just sitting here, I'm having flashbacks probably to the same night you're thinking about.
Yeah.
Excel has limits. Like I literally had a data set and I could make 3 keystrokes and Excel would crash. I spent like 22 hours trying to get a data set cleaned up for a load. It just is, it's insane. But Al, I mean, we call this series Salesforce at Scale. I argue a client who has chosen to go the Salesforce road, they're not a small company and they're not a static company. They're a company who's growing and they're a company that's having to change. Scaling is doing things in such a way that every time I grow, I don't have to go back and redo the things I did before because I didn't have that big a dream before. So now I've got to change it and rebuild that. This arguably is one of the best examples of build smart, start right. Like these are the phrases we say in a lot of these episodes. So as you talk about considering it, as you talk about training, as you talk about connecting to people, you don't have to solve world hunger with your first Data 360 project, right? You've got data, to Allie's point. There's somebody in the company somewhere that says, I pull data from here and I pull it from here and I know how I can connect these. I've already done the research. I figured out how to make that work. They know that. And if they can verbally say it, an agent can translate it into what it means for Data 360 to ingest it and serve it up. And I know we love our spreadsheets. Guilty, Your Honor. They're not databases. They're not. As much as I love to make them one. So yeah, this is something I think that makes companies so much more agile. And every person who goes into CRM does it for one reason, is to add or view things that make me more efficient and powerful to do the things I need to do to service my client and whatever product or service they're interested in. And if I have no idea the history because it's in some other adjacent system, that's really going to hamstring me, make me less effective in my job. So this is a way to really knock down walls for companies.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt there, but you're bringing so many PTSD stories from my past here. Like,
well, but
man,
that's the core of what we're talking about is how do we take these challenging moments and find a solution for them? Emily, you've said before, it's not about asking, hey, what data would you like to bring in? It's asking, what problem are you trying to solve? That might be a call center employee saying, customers keep asking me questions and I can only give them limited answers because I can't really see everything. It might be somebody, the order team saying, hey, it's really slowing down my workday because I keep having to go, my order fulfillment system, I keep having to relog in over here. And then it's just really frustrating for me. We're talking about actual tangible problems that we can solve. And that's what we need to be asking and focusing on because, Greg at 2 a.m. frustrated with spreadsheets on his really, really old Windows computer is not a fun time. So
laptop nearly died that night.
I know that we are just about at the end of our time here. So I do want to call out a couple of resources that people will be able to find in our show notes today. Emily has talked about a lot of Trailhead content, and we will have a trail mix linked. We also will have links to the Salesforce Data 360 LinkedIn page, a Salesforce Ben article that's helpful. And then Emily has also put together for us just a couple of example use cases that companies can use just to get started on Data 360. All of them will be simple, easy to set up, really basic ways to get started, because we really want to stress that Data 360 doesn't have to be scary. It can be something that you get started with and then iterate on in the future. I think that this is something that really can enhance so many companies' workflows. So those will all be linked in our show notes.
Awesome. Allie, thank you for stealing my closing statement. No, this is fantastic. My brain is just going to private equity. Like we continue to hear a lot of stories where private equity is coming in and they're consolidating companies. And if you've ever been around one of those things that happens, one of the first things that happens, they get everybody together and they start tying stuff together, and then they start eliminating people. So now I've got somebody in one company trying to access data in another company that they're not familiar with. There's so many ways that this story goes to just really help companies navigate those tumultuous waters. Thank you for doing the white papers, Emily. Thank you for collating all the resources, Allie. At the end of the day, to your point, there's just millions and millions of things out there, and an agent can't find you everything you want and break it down in that way. So, thank you for cutting through the noise and making this easier for our audience. Emily, great to have you back on the show. As we said last time, like we were focusing on the military side of your life and that story on the trends here at Sirius. But we said then, like you just showed up and somebody said, I'm not sure anybody's going to be able to do this. Emily raised her hand, and here you are coming on as our company expert in Data 360. It's a hard news cycle to keep up with. We're really grateful for you guys that are wearing that hat. I don't know if anybody's an expert or something that's changing so fast, but you're keeping up better than most. So we appreciate you bringing time today. Thank you both for your time. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Y'all have a good day.
Awesome. Bye. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming along today. Big thanks to Allie Nelson and Emily Skelton for cutting through the noise on Data 360. The takeaway I keep coming back to, the right question is not what should we bring in, it's what business problem are we trying to solve. Start with one bottleneck, one use case, one zero-copy connection. Iterate from there. Data 360 does not have to be the boil the ocean project that everybody fears. The other shift we're holding on to, the Agentforce 360 hooks, Tableau Semantics, and unstructured data support are not isolated features. Together, they signal where Salesforce is taking the platform. Real-time, connected, agent-ready, and built to live alongside your Snowflake, Databricks, ERP, and fulfillment systems instead of competing with them. This episode's helped. Share it with one admin, architect, or platform owner who is wrestling with the data cloud or Data 360 decision right now. Subscribe wherever you listen, and a quick review goes a long way in getting these conversations in front of more practitioners. Show notes, links, and resources are in the description. Reach out anytime at SiriusTalk@SiriusSolutions.com. Until next time, keep building smart and keep starting right.